Hey, can you add cream to the coffee? My pilot's a bit picky today. Laughter rippled through the flight crew as they watched the woman pouring coffee. But when the captain collapsed mid-flight, the coffee server stepped into the cockpit. 15 minutes later, the plane made an emergency landing. Safe. No one knew. She had been a top-level flight instructor. Donna Torres, 42 years old. Thin face, hair pulled back neatly, wearing the standard aviation technician uniform. Her main job, checking the cabin, brewing coffee for the flight crew, handling logistics before takeoff. Donna had worked for Airstar, a domestic airline, for 5 years. No one really knew where she came from. They only knew Donna was always first to arrive, last to leave. She spoke little, but was meticulous. That morning, she was brewing coffee in the service compartment. A group of young flight crew members walked by, joking around. "Hey, Dana, add some cream, will you?" The captain's a bit cranky today. A co-pilot looked her up and down, then whistled mockingly. "Why don't you apply to be head flight attendant?" Donna just smiled faintly and continued working in silence. No one noticed how she checked their electronic panels. She always adjusted 3 technical points that no one else bothered to check: emergency door locks, pressure lights, and emergency rescue seats. An older technician, Brett, had once seen an old report with the name Dana Torres, instructor pilot, Tactical Unit 772. "You used to fly?" "Just a few times, enough to remember how to land," she replied softly. But in everyone's eyes, Dana was just the nice coffee lady, a woman with no title, no noteworthy past. She had learned to blend into the background. Every morning at 5:30, she arrived at the hangar. Every evening at 8, she locked up the service area. In between, she moved through the airport like a ghost. Efficient, invisible, forgotten. The younger pilots would joke about her behind her back. Dana's been here forever, probably never been on a plane as a passenger. They had no idea she had logged over 2,000 flight hours in military aircraft. Sometimes when she watched planes taxi down the runway, her fingers would unconsciously trace flight patterns on her leg. The muscle memory never left. The instinct to read wind patterns, to calculate approach angles, to feel the aircraft's rhythm, all of it remained, buried beneath years of silence. But Dana had made peace with invisibility. She had learned that sometimes the most important work happens in the shadows. Sometimes the greatest strength comes from being underestimated. Every cup of coffee she served, every safety check she performed, every small act of service, it was all preparation. Not for recognition, not for glory, but for the moment when her hidden skills might be needed most. She just didn't know that moment was coming tomorrow. 12 years earlier, Dana had been a high-level flight instructor at Laughlin Air Force Base. She was selected to test pilot a new jet trainer model in adverse weather conditions. During one flight, the system malfunctioned, causing a trainee to panic and activate his ejection seat prematurely. Dana had successfully brought the aircraft back safely, but command needed someone to blame for the failed test. As the training officer, Dana was held responsible. Her instructor certification was revoked, and she was recommended for early retirement. No one defended her publicly. Instead of fighting it in court, Dana quietly signed the discharge papers. She didn't return home, didn't join the Veterans Association, never spoke of what happened. The incident replayed in her mind constantly during those first months. She had done everything right, followed protocol, maintained composure, saved lives. But in the military's need for accountability, someone had to fall, and instructors, especially those without political connections, made easy targets. The trainee who had panicked, he received additional training and eventually became a commercial pilot. The faulty system? It was quietly redesigned. The real cause of the malfunction? Buried in classified reports. Donna learned a harsh lesson. Competence without connections meant nothing. Skill without status was invisible. Excellence without politics was expendable. She moved to Utah and took a logistics job with Airstar. No one knew she had once controlled hundreds of hours of jet flight time. No one knew she had trained many excellent pilots now working across America. "How long have you been in logistics?" a flight attendant asked one day. She just smiled. Long enough to realize what's really important. She hid everything. Commendations, medals, flight logs, all packed away in an old wooden box under her bed in a rented room. But the knowledge remained. Every time she walked past a cockpit, she automatically assessed the instrument panels. When she heard engines starting up, she could identify problems by sound alone. During her safety checks, she noticed details that even seasoned mechanics missed. Her supervisor once commented, "Dana, you're incredibly thorough, almost like you have professional training." "I just pay attention," she had replied. The truth was more complex. Dana had been stripped of her official credentials, but not her expertise. She had lost her rank, but not her instincts. The military had taken her position, but they couldn't take her skill. So she waited. Not for vindication. She had given up on that. Not for recognition. She had learned to live without it. She waited for purpose. For the moment when her hidden knowledge might serve something greater than her own ambition. Years passed. The sharp edges of her anger softened into quiet resolve. The burning need for justice transformed into patient readiness. She stopped thinking about what she had lost and started focusing on what she could still give. Every morning, as she performed her routine checks, Dana reminded herself, a warrior doesn't need a uniform to serve. She had learned to find dignity in small acts of service, honor in invisible contributions, strength in silent preparation. The young pilots who mocked her didn't know they were joking with someone who could outfly most of them blindfolded. The passengers who barely noticed her didn't realize she was studying every safety system, every exit route, every emergency protocol. Donna Torres had become something the military never intended to create. A guardian without glory, a protector without recognition, a pilot without wings who was still, somehow, always ready to fly. The fateful day arrived. Flight 223 from Seattle to Albuquerque. 198 passengers. Captain Brent Morris, co-pilot Daniel Koch. The plane took off smoothly for the first 90 minutes. Dana completed her routine checks, served coffee on schedule. Suddenly, the captain collapsed right onto the control panel. The plane shook violently. The co-pilot panicked, adjusted the pressure controls incorrectly, triggering cabin alarms. The autopilot disengaged. No one knew why. Flight attendants screamed. A passenger fainted from the pressure drop. The co-pilot shouted desperately, "We need someone to help." Anyone with flight experience, "Get up here now." Dana set down her tray, removed her gloves, and looked through the frosted glass partition. No one noticed her stepping into the cockpit, until the co-pilot yelled, "Get out!" "You're not allowed in here," she said calmly. "Open the auxiliary controls." "I used to fly T-38s. This system is derived from that." 10 seconds later, the control panel lit up again. Dana manually adjusted the heading, stabilized altitude at 22,000 feet. She called air traffic control. "This is Torres, former Air Force pilot. I'm making an emergency control of Flight 223. The entire control tower fell silent. "Are you Dana Torres, Unit 772? "Affirmative. Copy that. Flagstaff Airport is opening emergency auxiliary runway. Full lighting activated. Can you bring her in?" "I've landed in 80-knot crosswinds before. This is a tailwind. Clear the approach." Her hands moved across the controls with practiced precision. 15 years of muscle memory kicked in, as if she had never stopped flying. The aircraft responded to her touch like an extension of her will. In the cabin, the screaming gradually stopped. Passengers pressed their faces to windows, watching the ground grow closer. Dana maintained perfect composure, her voice steady as she communicated with ground control. "Flight 223, you're cleared for landing. Emergency vehicles standing by." "Understood. Beginning final approach." The co-pilot watched in amazement as Dana executed a textbook emergency landing. Her hands never trembled. Her voice never wavered. Every adjustment was precise, calculated, perfect. As the plane descended, Donna's mind was completely clear. This was what she had been training for her entire career. Not the routine flights, not the training exercises, but this moment when lives hung in the balance and every decision mattered. The runway appeared below them. Dana adjusted for wind shear, compensated for the aircraft's weight distribution, and brought the plane down with surgical precision. 18 minutes after taking control, the landing gear touched the runway. The aircraft rolled to a perfect stop. When the doors opened, ground personnel rushed aboard. "Who was the pilot?" A flight attendant pointed toward Dana. who was already removing her gloves, turning to walk away. "Wait," the co-pilot called out. "That woman, she just saved everyone on this plane." Dana paused at the cockpit door. For a moment, the weight of years fell away. She was no longer the invisible coffee server. She was no longer the disgraced instructor. She was once again what she had always been, a pilot. But instead of savoring the moment, she simply nodded and continued walking. She had done what needed to be done. Nothing more, nothing less. As she reached the cabin, passengers began to applaud. Some were crying. Others reached out to touch her arm as she passed. A child looked up at her with wide eyes and whispered, "Are you a superhero?" Dana knelt down to the child's level. "No, sweetheart. I'm just someone who remembered how to do her job." But as she stood up, she caught her reflection in the cabin window. For the first time in 12 years, she saw herself clearly. Not as the woman who had been cast aside, not as the worker who had been overlooked, but as the pilot she had never stopped being. The landing had taken 18 minutes, but Dana Torres had been preparing for those 18 minutes her entire life. The news spread across social media like wildfire. A passenger's video clip was broadcast on CNN. Coffee server saves 198 lives mid-flight. One of her former students, now a training commander at Andrews Air Force Base, wrote publicly, "She taught me to fly by instinct. Today she saved an entire plane with that same instinct." The next day, the airline held a recognition ceremony. The director announced Dana Torres, not just an employee, but a model of quiet strength, resilience, and honor. She was invited to return as an instructor for the Emergency Flight Situations program. Dana declined the highest position offered. "I just want to continue contributing. Through actions, not titles." But this time, when she served coffee, the entire flight crew stood up and bowed respectfully. The transformation was immediate and profound. Pilots who had once dismissed her now sought her advice. Flight attendants asked about her emergency procedures. Even passengers, when they recognized her, would thank her personally. Dana found herself in an unexpected position. She had spent years being invisible, and now everyone wanted to see her. She had been content in silence, and now everyone wanted to hear her speak. Interview requests poured in. Documentary producers called. Publishers offered book deals. She declined them all. "I'm not interested in fame," she told her supervisor. "I'm interested in service." The airline created a new position for her, senior safety consultant. She would review emergency protocols, train staff on crisis management, and serve as a bridge between ground operations and flight crews. For the first time in years, Dana felt truly useful, not as a symbol or a story, but as a professional doing work that mattered. Young pilots would approach her nervously, asking technical questions they were embarrassed to ask their official instructors. She would answer patiently, never making them feel small for not knowing. "The most important thing," she would tell them, "is not what you know, but what you do when you don't know." Flight attendants began incorporating her safety checks into their routines. Ground crew started adopting her meticulous inspection methods. The ripple effect of her expertise spread throughout the entire operation. But perhaps the most significant change was in Dana herself. She no longer moved through the airport like a ghost. She walked with quiet confidence, acknowledging colleagues, offering guidance when asked, participating in the community she had once observed from the margins. She had learned that recognition, when earned through service rather than sought through ambition, carried a different weight. It wasn't about her anymore. It was about what she could give. Honor doesn't need a nameplate. Courage doesn't need to shout. There are people who, despite being overlooked, quietly hold other people's lives in their hands. Dana Torres didn't need a title. She just needed one moment to show the entire world. A true warrior never leaves their post. Sometimes the most important battles are fought in silence. Sometimes the greatest victories are won by those who never sought glory. Sometimes the people who save us are the ones we never see coming. Dana Torres had learned the hardest lesson of all, that real strength isn't measured by recognition, but by readiness. That true honor isn't found in titles, but in the willingness to act when action is needed most. She had been cast aside, overlooked, forgotten, but she had never stopped being ready. And in 18 minutes above the clouds, that readiness saved 200 lives. The coffee server, who was actually a pilot, had finally come home.